And for me, is my name and the date, because the human being you are is so, you are a man of my dad's nature, sensitivity, and sensibility, and I'm so proud to have known you through him. So have a stick of gum and come back safe.
Oh my God, Lynn. I remember that. Thank you. Lynn, thanks so much. Just a flood of memories come back as you spoke. Only in America could a guy with 3 years of college be standing here recognized by a college like one of the Ohio State University. But Dean, excuse me, Dean, to be here today, just think what happens to you when you say the words John Glenn. Just think of what comes to mind when you hear those words, a gentleman whose name alone was his passport to the trust of the American people. And I would just say here in Washington, D.C., I was talking to some of the young students earlier, a town that sometimes has a wonderfully rambunctious partisan air, but Republican or Democrat would make no difference when you say those two words, John Glenn. The trust is there, and we look upon someone like that with such awe today, but we never thought, even when we were around him, just to take him for granted, because there was just a power to John Glenn and what he represented. And I do not have, I will tell you right up front, ladies and gentlemen, I do not have the words to fully express my admiration and respect for Lynn's father, for Annie's husband, for a man who did what he did. You know, we all need role models in this world. We all need them because they inspire us to listen to our better angels. They remind us, if we look at someone like this, that we can always be better the next day. And there's a song that I still remember. I didn't understand it much at the time, and it's so old today you have to listen to National Public Radio to hear it played. But it was by a group called Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And it kind of goes, you, when you're on the road, must have a code that you can live by. I didn't really understand it, but we're all on a road, we're all on a journey, we all need a code. And the role models we choose to remind us of what we can be in this country that gives us so many beautiful opportunities. Among mine, as I looked at the world that I was so fortunate to live in, John Glenn shone very brightly. And for you students here tonight, you're going to have to look long and hard to find a more decent role model, one who lived by virtue, a word that is often not used in today's America, but in fact, if you go back to McGuffey's Reader, if you go back to the 1800s, if you go back to Abraham Lincoln, you find it much more common as we look at how do we evaluate not others, but ourselves, how you evaluate yourself. And I remember a Marine barracks parade one night, Lynn, when your father, I was the hosting officer there, and as it gets toward evening, everybody goes and sits in the stands, the Marines are lined up in the dark, and there I was with Senator Glenn and I standing there together in the shadows waiting to go out front, as I told you, young people there, and act important. And as we stood there, John Glenn was reminiscing. Dean, it won't surprise you, he was looking back on his time as a Marine. He said, you know, he said, Jim, I was a Marine for 23 years. Wasn't nearly long enough. Interesting comment for a man who rose to the heights he did in the space program, in the Senate, and certainly in the hearts of us all. And you think of a man who fought in World War II, became an ace during Korea, the first man to orbit the Earth, his time in the Senate for a quarter of a century, and he exemplified, I think, the expression which is so dear to the American Marines of Semper Fi, Semper Fidelis, always faithful, because he was always faithful to his country, to his Marines, and certainly to his family and to his childhood sweetheart, Annie. And certainly with his kids, too, and Annie at his side in person when he was stateside, and in spirit when he was at war or when he was in outer space. He would even paint their names on the side of his airplane when he went into combat, which says something about the link that would never be broken, the physical space notwithstanding. I got to know him, excuse me, and Annie, thanks to my former boss, Deputy Secretary of Defense Rudy De Leon, who joined us here this evening. I was Rudy's senior military assistant, and he was quite aware that I swore I will never set foot in the Pentagon again when I leave your duty. Be very careful what you proclaim to yourself or the world, I will warn you. But he was also, for many years, with Senator Glenn on the Hill, and a noted public servant in his own right. And I would tell you, too, that he taught me a bit about Senator Glenn, and then I was, of course, exposed to the senator, and I would get him talking on many occasions on the phone or in person. And when you think of a man born in 1921, and humankind had barely really gotten its aviator wings in the air at that time, and eventually he would actually take us into outer space. And I think that he always excelled. He didn't just dabble in things. And for you young folks, again, to pick out something that you really love, that you really want to throw yourself into and excel, is a part of having meaning in life. So pick wisely and work hard. Flying in Korea, you know, one of the greatest stories I think I ever heard was when he talked about what it was like, the disappointment he felt when he flew a mission and he didn't run into the enemy. He was actually disappointed about that. Eventually, the ground crew painted on the side of his aircraft, MiG, Mad Marine. In other words, he loved going after MiG so much, they thought he was crazy. But he was always faithful to his fellow Marines, and in that war in Korea, a Marine reservist who was making a lot of money, the finest baseball player of his era, one of the finest ever, Ted Williams, came back on active duty when his country called. He didn't try to get out of it. Came back on active duty, and guess who his wingman was? None other than John Glenn. What an all-American story that is when you think of these two flyboys up there together. And he was, granted in his later years, especially some of Ted Williams' language was somewhat uncouth, but Annie could walk into his house with the senator, and as soon as she heard the first bad word, she'd say, "Now, Theodore, stop that." And the finest baseball player in the world immediately kowtowed to Miss Annie and carried on listening to his better angels. One time, Ted Williams was hit by enemy fire and his plane on fire. You know, he's coming in and everyone's telling him to punch out. And of course, in those days, the way you punched out was very injurious. He knew he'd probably never play baseball again if he survived. So he rode the plane in. And I think all the way in, it was John Glenn coaching him in to land a plane on fire without its wheels down. And you can imagine that's just one more time that cool hand John Glenn was able to be there, always faithful alongside others. And you'll notice a theme here that he sticks with you. The tough times to him are just times to get tougher. You don't fade away. And after serving in Korea, becoming a Navy test pilot, he got interested in space, and you all know what happened. He excelled once again, strapping himself to the head, to the nose cone of what was then an intercontinental ballistic missile that could launch him into outer space. And some ladies with slide rules had figured out, yeah, we think we can bring you back too if you do this and that. And wouldn't you know, something went wrong. And for those of you who've been to the third floor there and looked at that little handle of what he had to bring, it looks like something out of the 1970s video game or something, you know, or no, we didn't even have video games then. And to think he was able to bring her home like that, and a 14-year-old Lynn watched her father, probably holding her breath, for somewhere around several hours, hoping that Dad would get home. So he comes out of NASA, he becomes this celebrated leader on the Senate floor. When John Glenn spoke, he was listened to. There was not just a gravitas, there was an actual mastery, again, of what he was doing, and a deep and abiding love for the people he represented and for the Senate itself, something to remember when we're in a town that sometimes takes cheap shots at an organization that so much is riding on. He was a man who rode for the brand, as we say out west. He stuck with it, and in good times and bad, you saw him keep his honor clean. He kept cool, and Annie withstood it all right alongside him, right on through it all. So you give this stature of this man and his family, and you have to say, at Ohio State, the Glenn College faculty and students, the Buckeye community, I would just tell you right up front, I am humbled by this award, and you can understand why. When I think of standing here and being recognized in the words of the dean and the words of Lynn, his beloved daughter, I would just tell you that it's about public service. It's not about me. It's not about me, and I'm not being falsely modest here. It's about public service. We're trying to build a country here, and it's noble work, and it's never done. Up here, I think it's about an hour's drive northwest of here, there's a battlefield cemetery at a place called Antietam, and there's a Union soldier up on a pillar there, a statue of one. He's overlooking his comrades, but that pillar is inscribed with the words, "Not for themselves, but for their country." And you think of that long-held tradition and how simply it was portrayed by the man we call Senator John Glenn. Not for himself, but for his country. It was not even a burden for him. It was truly a pleasure when you met with him and talked with him. I was up in New York City when I first met him for the July 4th ceremony. We were on a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, which is pretty wonderful. And Annie Glenn just thought it was a hoot that my date that night was Dr. Ruth. You young folks don't know who that is, and that's a good thing. But Annie she couldn't get over it. She'd never let me forget it either, I might add, about what a delightful date I had that night.
Mother just told that story.
I'm not surprised that Lynn's mom just told that story. It has caused me no end of grief, I will tell you that. But I would tell you, too, that as we build this country in John Glenn's image, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to remember it doesn't matter where you do it, where you contribute, your family, your parish, your school district, your county, your state, your country, the military, civil service, the intelligence agencies. Wherever it is a noble mission, and you have to remember that, especially when the going gets rough, and it's gotten a little rough here in our beautiful country. I would just tell you, too, that we give an awful lot of authority to young officers, for example, in the military. We don't always give them enough authority, and we do that on purpose to remind them when we give them the responsibility and not enough authority, it's going to be your teamwork. It's working with each other in public service. It means putting aside petty grievances. It means accepting the humanity of the people standing and working next to you, not characterizing them by a certain political stripe or another, rather by their humanity, by their being the mother of a girl trying to get into college, the father of a son with MS. It's by remembering we're more connected than we are separated by those issues that have to do with our vision for this country as we all work together to turn it over in as good a shape or better than we received it. That's our obligation to the next generation. I think, too, that when you look at John Glenn's friendship with those of us that he impacted, it always amazed me that he drew no distinction between those of high rank or low. We were sitting in New York's best deli, and a young girl came up to us, very crowded, you know New York, you know the delis, okay, you get the picture. And she comes up, she's knee-high to a duck, and she's got her napkin, and she puts it up and asks, "John Glenn, can I have your autograph?" And of course, guess what happened then? The line formed and they're coming up. Well, we had the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and guess what? There's always these guys with earphones and guns, you know? So at one point, I asked the senator, if you want, we can have the bodyguards take care of this. He said, no. He said, these people all paid my paycheck for my entire life. The least I can do is sign a napkin or two. Modest, humble, everybody counts. Doesn't matter where they're from. Doesn't matter a bit. They're human beings. They have a divine spark, and he's going to connect. And that has got to inspire us to be better ourselves each day and for the rest of our lives. And so please make sure as you work, and sometimes you get frustrated because our country is imperfect. Thank God she's imperfect. It gives us all something to roll up our sleeves and do. But as you get sometimes worn out a little bit by it all, just remember, John Glenn didn't get worn out by it. He didn't suck his thumb. He kept at it. He kept at it, and he kept at it. He held the line on his honor. He held the line on treating others with a sense of decency. I'm sure he was as tempted as anyone with the frustrations of the day. And as you go on through your life, as you go on through your career, just remember, too, something that Joshua Chamberlain, a man who had also fought in the Civil War, and not that John Glenn did, but I mean a man who fought in a Civil War, said that in great deeds, something abides. And I bring that up because there's greatness in every life. It's just a matter of you giving it that sort of attention, the sort of attention that comes from putting others first. So as we say in the Marines, Semper Fi, John Glenn, always faithful. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm humbled to be here. One thing I would like to do is offer these folks over here, because they know what's coming, the opportunity to ask a question or two so that you can be reassured about what the young students of the Ohio State University bring to bear. So who's going to come after me with the first one? They're prepared for this, so there shouldn't be much of a pause at all. What's it like to work with President Trump? It's an adventure. But I will tell you that he is a keener listener than his TV persona would indicate, that he will listen. You've got to have it all together and make sure that you can drive the point home. But you know, when the president calls on you, Republican or Democrat, there's only one answer in America, and you go. And you don't go half-stepping, you don't go half-hearted, you go what we say in the Marines, that should show you I am an intellectual, totus porcus. That's Latin for whole hog, okay? But my point is, you stick with the country, you stick with our processes, you keep the faith, and you go for it, okay? There was another question, I think, over, yeah.
You talked earlier about really helping government and Constitution. Do you have a favorite article or a favorite amendment?
A favorite article in the Constitution? Yeah. As a matter of fact, I do have a favorite article in the Constitution. It's Article 1. Article 1 is not the president, not the executive. It's what? Legislative. Very good. It's legislative, and why do I like it? Let me tell you about John Glenn's Marine Corps. It does not exist today, thanks to the love of the presidency, of any presidency, probably. It does not exist today because of the Office of Management and Budget or the Department of Defense. It exists today thanks to the House of Representatives and the Senate, because for some reason, that probably thanks to former Marines like John Glenn, they make certain whatever the president asks for, they top it off a little bit, okay? You get it? So I have fallen in love with Article 1 of the Constitution because that's the legislative branch, and that's been the saving grace of the U.S. Marine Corps. Yes, go ahead.
What's your
it's hard to pick out a favorite book. Certainly Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is one that will remind you on a bad day, things going wrong, maybe some people find a little bit of fault with you. You read that book and you remind yourself that you just choose your own response to whatever happens around you. You don't have to choose a negative one. Good things and bad things, as we were talking about earlier, young folks, good things and bad things happen in everybody's life. And, you know, you've just got to decide the only thing you can really control in this world is your response to what happens. And as you do that, it'll also teach you, it'll remind you that other people are carrying a heavy burden. And so don't add to it. Try to see them through life, not see through them in a way to put yourself forward. There was another question down. Yeah, go ahead, right here.
I was going to say, being Secretary of Defense, I'm sure, comes with a lot of responsibility. But what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of it for you? What have you learned from it so far?
What's the most rewarding part of being Secretary of Defense? It is the unbelievable young people who every year, high quality, eye-wateringly high quality young people who look beyond the hot political rhetoric, who rally to the flag, who basically what they do at age, 18, this young gal, this young guy, is they sign a blank check to all of you, payable with their lives, to protect this experiment. And it just floors me. It is an unbelievable honor to be around them. It sobers me every day when I walk in. It gets me through 4 congressional hearings in 1 week. Without using language that Annie would be calling me by James instead of Jim. It keeps us human. You know, it keeps us human. Yes, ma'am.
You talked a lot about John Glenn's legacy, not only at Ohio State, but throughout his career service. What kind of legacy do you hope to leave?
You know, what kind of legacy would I hope to leave? You know, I try not to think about it. I try to work on what is the issue and do what is right, so I don't think about how it's going to be written about the next day or how it's going to be looked back upon. Because my hair is gray, I've made more mistakes than most of you in this room. And all you can do is also maintain a certain modesty and a certain forgiveness of yourself. And don't allow yourself to start thinking you're writing a book. When you're in the job, do the job and turn over whatever you're doing. Just try to turn it over a little bit better. The first time I saw this word usufruct, U-S-U-F-R-U-C-T, was written by Thomas Jefferson. And basically he said we hold our responsibilities in usufruct. I didn't quite understand that. That's not a quote, it's close. And he was a planter. He was a farmer. And what it means is you can cut down the trees, you can change where the water goes, you can plant field, but you must turn the land over. You do whatever you want. You must turn it over in as good a shape or better than you found it. And that's where that theme came from for how I try to deal with it. And I leave it to people who will judge me how they want to do it. One day I'll be back on the banks of the Columbia River walking with my dog and whistling, you know. Yes, ma'am.
How do you make tough decisions, or do you have any advice on making tough decisions?
How do you make tough decisions? Really, I watched Deputy Secretary of Defense De Leon. You watch other people make these and focus on the essence of the issue, not on what people are going to think of you when you get done. You quantify every issue as much as you can. You should start with quantification. You may only be able to quantify 10%, but you should at least do that much. Some things you can quantify 80%. If you don't quantify at all, then you're lazy. If you over-quantify it, then you're mechanical. So knowing when to go with your head and at what point do you apply your heart. And I think if you always try to do it in that manner, you won't be too impulsive, but you also won't be paralyzed by trying to do everything, kind of by a script or something. I'd have to think about it. If I think of anything else, I'll see you afterward and I'll tell you, okay? That's a very good question. That may not be a sufficient answer. Any other questions from you young folks over there? Yes, sir. Oh, no, you're not No, that was the lady's arm behind you that was there, not yours being up. Okay. Well, I think we've about worn everybody out, Dean, so back over to you, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So it seems superfluous to say this after you've all just applauded so resoundingly, but please join me in congratulating this year's winner of the John Glenn College's Excellence in Public Service. So that was truly tremendous, but hopefully the night's not over. I know some of you are about to dash off to the U2 concert, but the bar is still open and there's food, and hopefully you all will have an opportunity to connect. So please enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you for attending tonight.